Welcome back to another deck profile. Today we're going to be taking a look at 2006 MetaNite. 2006 is one of my favorite formats, and I will actually be releasing a fully in-depth article on 2006 pretty soon, just waiting for Evan Cole to finish writing his part of that. But otherwise, look forward to that guide very soon. Today we're going to be looking at MetaNite, one of the most iconic strategies, I'd say, from 2006. Strong deck, also very cool. You get to play with a lot of cool Delta species Pokemon, and unfortunately a deck that pretty much completely falls off the map for RSPK due to its over-reliance on Poke Powers, common weaknesses in the types that it plays, as well as its the fact that it clears its board so much. Starting off with the deck, I decided to play the Holon engine for this deck. Now there's two ways you can play MetaNite. I'm playing the Holon engine for my list, and there's also the Turbo engine, which uses a different Beldum, and we'll talk about that. But in the Holon version of this deck, there's 4 Holon's Castform. This is our ideal starter due to its Delta draw, which counts the number of Pokemon you have in play that have Delta on them and draws that many cards. All of our basics in the deck otherwise have Delta on them. Holon's Castform doesn't count. But you can usually net 2 to 4 cards off of Delta Draw, making it a very good setup Pokemon. Holon's Castform is also a Holon's Pokemon, which means you can attach it as an energy card to one of your Pokemon. Essentially, you need to already have an energy card attached to that Pokemon. So let's just say I have a Beldum here. I cannot just attach Holon's Castform as 2 Rainbow Energies. Instead, I must have an energy already attached to it, and then I can Castform, and this goes back to my hand. That's how the Holon's Pokemon work. I think it's very good both to have this as an engine in the deck, and it's also just very, very strong for setting up your deck for consistency. And then in the late game, you have continued value, where I think like the Turbo version loses a lot of late game value, where it has that strong setup as well with the potential Beldums. But it loses the late game value that Castform has in providing energy for you to attack. This deck wants to discard energy from play, so Castform being a recoverable energy card to guarantee you have a hand attachment all the time is pretty nice. Now that said, this deck's damage is based on how many energy cards you discard, not how many energy you discard. So when you discard a Castform, it only counts as 1 energy card, not 2 energy, even though it says it's 2 energy. So there is a downside to that. We play 4 of the Beldum that has the Poke Body, Conductive Body. This Beldum is a Delta species Pokemon, so we get to take advantage of course, Castform for more draw. And it also has that Conductive Body, which says as long as your Beldum's your active Pokemon, you pay colorless less to retreat Beldum for each Beldum on your bench. So ideally, we have 8 good starters in this deck with Beldum and Castform. And we have 3 bad starters in this deck, or less optimal starters, actually not that bad, with Dratini. But ideally, if we start Beldum, we can get another Beldum and retreat it into Castform, or we just start Castform and we don't have to worry about it, giving us very good outs to a very strong opening. Takedown is an okay attack doing 30 damage. Notably, Grass Resistance is actually pretty big on Beldum. Grass Resistance is pretty omnipresent in this deck, being that all of your guys have that. You're going to have a little bit of a better time into Flaridos, which is a somewhat common deck in 2006. And you'll also tank early damage from Nidorina and Nidoran female. So bonus points there for good resistance in this format. And yes, Flaridos is actual good deck. Oh yeah, the other Beldum, by the way, I'll put it on screen right now. It says, you may flip a coin if heads, search your deck for another Beldum. So the goal with that Beldum is that you find the first Beldum and it finds you the second, and it maybe finds you the third. You know, you get lucky on coin flips, you find them all. Very good for turboing out, less consistent overall, is my opinion of those. But it did get top 4 at Worlds. Yuta Matsuda, I believe, played that list that year, and then we later went on to win 2010 Worlds with Luxchamp with the Spirit. 2 copies of Metang. We play because it's the Delta species one. It's got some pretty decent attacks on this guy, but honestly, nothing really special. 3 for 50 is okay, but you really don't want to be attaching 3 energy to your Metang because Metagross only needs 2 to attack, and if 3 energy goes down, you're in a bad spot. I play 1 copy of Psychic Metagross. You'll see this popping in and out of lists depending on who you ask. On one hand, this guy is not searchable like the other Delta Pokemon are. The other Delta Pokemon in this deck are searchable because of a card we'll talk about later. This guy is not searchable. You just have to raw draw him. That said, this deck has a very good consistency engine, and usually you do not want to lead this Metagross. This is not your lead attacker in just about any matchup other than, I don't know, maybe Mewtrick would be a deck where you'd want to see this guy early so you can hit for that psychic weakness if they attack with Mew. That said, the rest of the matchups you're not usually attacking with this Metagross. He's there for that super connectivity Poke Power. Once during your turn, if you have a Psychic or Metal Energy in your discard pile, you can accelerate it to your active Pokemon, and they take 10 damage. Now, the 10 damage is annoying, but essentially this is giving us an extra energy accelerator each turn. This deck has 2 energy accelerators then, with Dragonite, the other line we'll talk about in a little bit. And then you have Metagross. Being able to attach to your active is actually very, very important. It's an underrated factor of this deck. Because Metagross discards all energy, or discards energy from play, sometimes you need to discard all of your energy in order to score a key knockout, but then that leaves your active with no energy, and you take 2 energy to attack with any of your attackers. So being able to get an extra 1 and then hand attach, or you can, let's just say, super connectivity, get a metal energy, then Castform the metal energy back to your hand. Now you have 2 energy too, as well. So basically, we're giving ourselves max amounts to have an attack every single turn, which is pretty good. Again, that Link Blast attack, not very good, but something to potentially keep in mind. We do not play any Psychic Energy. I think the top 4 list at Worlds played Psychic Energy in the Utica Monster build. You do not need it in this build because we have Castform paying that lightning or that Psychic Energy cost at any point we want it to. But otherwise, Metagross is just cool because we have no other ways to retrieve our Metal Energy. Now, one thing it's worth saying is that because you're damaging yourself by 10 when you use Super Connectivity and Energy back into play, you're kind of taking away the upside of Metal Energy doing damage reduction. But it's more important just to have extra energy in play, and it will kind of offset that damage you do take as an upside. It's a downside that you take the damage, but it's still an upside that you're getting an extra energy, and the Metal Energy will kind of, in theory, reduce damage still to offset the damage you take. We have 3 copies of Metagross, our main attacker, Metagross Delta. One of the most beautiful cards, I think, of all time. Also going to be featured in the upcoming reprint set. Metagross Delta has that Delta control, letting you look at the top 4 cards of your deck and picking any one of them, and putting the other 3 at the bottom in any way you like, or in any order you like. It is Dracloak on crack. If you've seen Recon Directive, that looks at the top 2 and keeps 1. This looks at the top 4. Now, you do only still get to keep 1 card, but that is a ton of dig. If you have multiple Metagross in play, it's very easy to find this other Metagross. Like I said, unsearchable card, but once you get your first Delta Metagross online, this deck really just explodes into play. And the attack is Crush and Burn. Does 30 plus 20 for each energy you discard from your Pokemon in play. So it's kind of like a Blacephalon-esque attack, if you've seen Blacephalon GX. Kind of like Raging Bolt, which is the more modern example of that. So our goal is to accelerate extra energy into play with either Metagross or Dragonite, which we'll talk about, and then use Crush and Burn to take knockouts. Pretty simple deck. How do we get the energy? Let's talk about the Dragonite line. Dratini is worth noting for that Thunder Wave. We play the Thunder Wave Dratini. There's 2 Delta Dratinis. You want this one. Thunder Wave, flip a coin of heads. Defending Pokemon is now paralyzed. Very, very good opening attack, if nothing else. Again, we don't want to open this. These are our 8 openers we want to get. But if you are forced to open it, then you could do a lot worse. So, worth saying, very good. Double resistance on this guy is actually very, very cracked. The whole line, in fact, has double resistance of grass and fighting. That comes up a lot. So against Nidoqueen, you're going to have some pretty bulky guys, which is nice to have. Next up, we have 2 copies of Dragonair. I believe this Twister one is better. I believe the other one has the same amount of HP, but just has an unreliable slam attack, where you're like flipping 2 coins, doing 20 for each heads. This one is much better. Twister does 20 damage. You flip 2 coins. If both are tails, it does nothing, which sucks. Same attack on Kingdra from Neo Revelation, I believe. But for each heads you get, you discard energy attached to the defending Pokemon. That can be pretty big in this format, especially with Double Rainbow energy being a pretty common fixture in decks like Rye Eggs and Nidoqueen and Ludicargo. Being able to get rid of those energies is really, really big if you have the unfortunate Dratini start, at least you have a decent turn to attack, if nothing else. And then next up we have 3 copies of Dragonite. I do believe running 3 copies is optimal. Some lists run a 2-1-2 or a 2-0-2 or a 2-2-2. I want 3 copies of Dragonite in the deck. Frankly, I would choose to run 2 Dratini, 2 Dragonair, and 3 Dragonite before I'd cut a Dragonite out, just because they're less searchable. But I like my even evolution line, so I'm choosing to run the 3 Dragonite. I think that is optimal. Dragonite's here for Delta Charge. Once during your turn, you may take a Lightning Energy from the discard pile and attach to one of your benched Pokemon. That is Dynamotor Eel, it's Dynamotor Flaffy. If you've been around the game, Psychic Recharge Malamar. These kind of abilities pop up all the time. This is the first one for Lightning Energy, so get to accelerate Lightning Energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. I like running this thick line, gives you lots of energy accelerators. Against LBS, they're going to be trying to dog these guys really quickly, so having extras that you can get into play is really good. Also has some decent attacks. Agility, says for 30 for 2 energy. Flip a coin of heads, prevent all effects of attacks, including damage done to Dragonite next turn. Actually pretty good against decks that cannot snipe. Sometimes you'll force a warp point out of your opponent, or you might just miss a turn of attacking altogether. Everyone's seen a game where some kind of bullshit attack like this has won the game. And heavy impact for 4 does 70. Is not a very good damage ratio on the attack. However, it is an attack that does not discard all of your energy like Crush and Burn does. So there's times where this will come up where it's optimal to hit with 70 to take a knockout and conserve your energy in play for Metagross next turn. So that is our Pokemon line. Very thin Pokemon line. Remember, the metal version of the deck gets to play a little bit more techie Pokemon. They usually play Jirachi in their deck as well to look at the top 5, find a card, since they have that Metal Search Beldum in the deck. There's some advantages to that. I like this variant much better, so that's why we're running it. Next up, we have 3 copies of Steven's Advice. Steven is a card that I am very, very high on in 2006, and I may be wrong for as high as I am on the card. But it is very good, especially in this deck right here. We are not a deck that threatens the opponent's bench really at all. So the opponent's not going to feel shy about benching out, especially with Holon Mentor in the format, which decks use to find 3 basic Pokemon from the deck. Decks against this deck are usually going to bench out pretty safely, unless they realize that your deck is fully on Steven. If they make the meta call that you're relying on Steven for draw, then sure. We do not play Holon Scientist in this deck, which is another powerful draw card in this format. If you want to swap one of the Stevens for a Holon Scientist, be my guest. I think Steven is very good in this format, and I think Steven is especially good in this deck. So I choose to run 3 copies, though, like I said, I could be swayed. 2 copies of Rocket's Admin. Oh yeah, also Steven doesn't work if you have so many cards in your hand. If you have that many cards in your hand, you're probably set up anyway, is my thought process. So, Steven, good. 2 copies of Rocket's Admin is each player shuffles away their hand and draws a card for each of their prizes. It's good to have some disruption in this deck, so you have some comeback potential. This deck, with its consistency, once it gets set up, even if it goes down a prize or 2, it can make that time up by using Rocket's Admin against a deck like LBS, and then knocking out one of their Pokemon with a Rocket's Admin forces a little bit out of them to respond, which is pretty good. Also, just a very strong draw card in general. 2 copies of Holon Mentor. Holon Mentor says that you discard a card from your hand and search your deck for 3 basic Pokemon with 100 HP or less and put them into your hand. This is our setup supporter of choice. You could run maybe more of these, but I think 2 is fine, especially in this deck. 2 feels pretty fine. You're able to find it with a card we'll talk about in just a little bit. And it's good to have that setup supporter. You can also grab Castform for energies throughout the game, but I feel like in this deck especially, we don't really have that many basic Pokemon. So I run 3 Holon Mentor when I'm playing LBS because it's a card that remains useful throughout the game. In this deck, you really kind of want your Mentors early, and you might use 1 late game Mentor to recover Pokemon that you shuffled back into the deck. But otherwise, you're usually not using your Mentors mid to late game. 1 copy of Adventurer. It says, discard a card from your hand. If you discarded a Pokemon with Delta, draw 4. Otherwise, just draw 3. Since all of our Pokemon besides Castform, we can discard to draw 4. Nice little draw boost there. Otherwise, we're going to discard... Oh yeah, Metagross as well. Otherwise, you're just going to discard a card from your hand, usually a Lightning Energy, to draw 3 cards. It's good to have a card that discards cards. That way we can start getting Lightning Energy in the discard pile even before our opponent takes a knockout or we take a knockout. It's good to get that extra attachments going. Also just nice to have a generic draw card that doesn't care about how many cards we have in hand. And 1 copy of Holon Researcher. Discard a card from your hand and search your deck for a Metal Energy or a Delta Pokemon. So this is our way that we find our Metagross and our Dragonite throughout the game. Some people choose to run this pretty highly in this deck. Some people run 2 Researcher. I think 1 Researcher is fine. The only problem is when you prize Researcher, if you get a bad hand and you prize Researcher and you're not able to get that first Metagross online, your setups can be pretty tough. But otherwise, I think 1 Researcher has been pretty good to me. I haven't really felt like I want a second other than when I prize it. Now you've probably seen all these Holon cards right here. Why are they all Holon supporters? It's because we have Holon Transceiver. You search your deck or discard pile for a Holon supporter card and put it into your hand. So this is our supporter engine. We can run 1 or 2 copies of all these supporters and have access to them throughout the game thanks to Holon Transceiver. It's kind of like Versus Seeker, but in this case on steroids for these Holon supporters. Now the Holon supporters are kind of lower power effects than, let's just say a Celio's Network, which just finds a Pokemon that isn't an EX from the deck. That's a stronger effect, theoretically, than Holon Researcher just only finding Delta Pokemon and having to discard a card from hand. But because Holon Transceiver is able to find those cards from your deck or discard pile, you have that built-in consistency. It's kind of like the tag call engine if you play GLC. Next up, we have 4 copies of Rare Candy. This is the old Rare Candy, so we can play it turn 1 or the first turn a Pokemon's put into play. I really need to get a 4th Emerald Candy because we have a e-reader border, Sandstorm Candy chilling in there, and that needs to get moved to 2004, but I will deal with that eventually. This deck absolutely wants 4 candy, so you can get your stage 2s up bright and early. Getting those Metagross online, the sooner you get one online, the better. Do be careful for ATM Rock in this format, which is a TM Devolution card. Devolves your entire board. If you rely too much on candy, you can get punished by ATM Rock, so be very careful against Ryags about using your candies unnecessarily. When you use a candy, you're also putting a Pokemon with a Poke Power in play, because all of our basics do not have Poke Powers. However, our Evolution Stage 2s all have Poke Powers, so be careful against decks with Cursed Stone, which is a stadium that applies damage to Pokemon with Poke Powers. 2 copies of Warp Point. Now, you'll see some debate in this deck about what kind of switching outs you play, but there's no doubt you have to play switching outs. Dragonite accelerates to the bench, and oftentimes our Castform gets stuck in the active in the early game if we want to initiate the first attack. You're going to need a Warp Point. But also, we have pretty heavy retreat guys, so it's Flurry Dose. It's good to have Warp Point. And against LBS, you also need Warp Point because it is a escape rope effect. It's going to force your opponent to switch as well. So some people run Switch in this deck over Warp Point. I think Warp Point is better. One of the problems the deck runs into against LBS is that Steelix is a very scary Pokemon and it's very hard to one-hit KO. Steelix has 150 HP and has a lightning resistance, and all of our attackers besides Metagross, Psychic Metagross, are lightning, so it is very hard to one-hit KO a Steelix. However, if you can Warp Point around it and steal another knockout 2 times in a row, and then once you're ready you can kill the Steelix, that feels pretty good. Now, Steelix is a huge adversary for this deck. It does snipe 100 damage, so anything that doesn't have a Metal Energy on it, like your Dragonites or your Metagross, are going to die. So LBS is a pretty kind of nail-biter matchup. You have to be very careful with your board management, what you're putting in play. Do you want to give your opponent a Stage 2 unguarded? Not really. Maybe it might be better to keep that as a Stage 1 so that you lose less resources if they decide to snipe that. Or they have to take a not knockout, which LBS is never wanting to attack for not a knockout. That is not how that deck wants to operate. Oh, I forgot to also say, do not play Fluffy Berry in this deck. Fluffy Berry is like a float stone for your Pokemon that aren't EXs, but you can get trapped with retreat locking effects. So play Warp Point or Switch, not Fluffy Berry. 2 copies of Pokemon Retriever. This is Rescue Stretcher if you're more modern. You get a Pokemon from your discard pile either into your hand or you shuffle 3 into your deck. Usually this deck is going to want to go for the Shuffle 3 to deck. However, you can, of course, get Castform as an energy card right to your hand, pretty good. And you can, of course, get Metagross right to your hand to launch another attack. Some lists play Holon Farmer in them. Holon Farmer is a supporter card in the Holon engine that recovers 3 Pokemon and 3 basic energy. However, you're forced to shuffle basic energy back into the deck, which we do not usually want to do with this deck. And you also have to get 3 Pokemon to the deck. You can't have the option of getting into hand. It's your supporter card for turn. I did not like it at all in this deck, so I cut it. Next up, we're going to the stadiums. In 2006, stadium wars are a thing. Stadiums are very highly in contention. Decks are often playing 4, 5, sometimes even 6 stadium cards in their deck to try to win the stadium war. This deck has 4 stadium cards, 2 different ones that we'll talk about. And there is some options for how you can approach this. We have 2 copies of Holon Ruins. Holon Ruins says that if a player has a Delta Pokemon in play, they can draw a card and then discard a card from their hand. So this is good for this deck. We get to draw a card, and then we can discard Lightning Energy for Dragonite to recharge. Or we can discard a supporter card we don't need. It's great for thinning the deck as well. And usually decks don't have a way to steal this unless they're also a Delta species deck, though some decks are running Delta Pidgey in their decks just to steal this stadium effect. So be careful about that. And we have 2 copies of Desert Ruins. Desert Ruins damages Pokemon EX that have 100 HP or more in between turns. So, you know, your various EXs are, you know, Steelix and Blastoise are going to be taking damage in between turns. Blastoise is relevant. They're never giving us Blastoise to attack. But very relevant for dealing with Steelix, lowering its HP against Fart Canine EX. You can damage him. Any of those big EXs, we want to be damaging them with Desert Ruins throughout the game. And maybe if we can stick one for a little longer, that's pretty good. This deck does have to run at least 4 stadium cards because of Battle Frontier, which is a stadium in this format that turns off the abilities of evolved, colorless, metal, and dark Pokemon. These guys are part metal, so it completely shuts down this deck. Though you do still get that Metagross, hey, just saying. So you want 4 copies of stadiums in your deck at the very least to bump Battle Frontier out of play. Next up, we have 4 copies of Metal Energy. Remember, there is no basic Metal Energy. We have 3 different types as well. I'd like to get them all unified someday. 4 copies of Metal Energy. You cannot play basic metal in this format, so we are limited to either playing Metal Energy or playing something like Dark Metal, one of the specialty types. I'm going to move these stadium cards now that we've talked about them down here, just because this camera setup does not get the whole playmat in. So we're just going to move our stadiums over here. That way we can fit the energy. There we go. You absolutely need 4 Metal Energy. If you want to try running a Dark Metal or something like that in the deck, you could. Maybe for the Metal variant of the deck, that might be better. I think because we have Super Connectivity and we have Castform, we don't really need that in our deck. We're not going to run out of energy. And we have 9 Lightning Energy. Beautiful Holon Phantom's Prince. Took me a while to get all those, but all of my 06 decks are blinged to the teeth with Holon Phantom's Energies. Nice little flex there. I think you can potentially argue the energy count. If you want to play 10, you can play 10. If you want to play 8, you can play 8. I wouldn't diverge too much, from this count. It is a pretty decent count of energy. You don't want to be whiffing energy, and you don't want to be flooded on energy. So I'd stick around 1 or so within this count. This was based on Takuya Yoneda's top 16 list from Worlds. His list is a little different than this, but ultimately this is what I came to after a lot of testing. If you want to run 4 copies of Desert Ruins for more of that stadium damage, then you can. If you want to run 4 copies of Holon Ruins for max consistency, you can. You can adjust the supporter lines a little. Again, that Steven is potentially a flex spot if you do not believe in Steven, and I would just say get good. Anyway, that is 2006 MetaNite. Thanks for tuning in to another deck profile on the channel. And if you have any requests for what I cover next, just let me know.